Welcome to the Patriot Perspective. My name is Gregory Logikov, and I'm joined here with my co-host Ofer Adar.
Hello, everybody. Today's the 15th of November, and today we're looking at a whole host of major stories. As we all know, the House Oversight Committee released 20,000 messages related to the Epstein files. So we want to go through that and give our analysis of what is contained within those files. And that will connect to a whole host of other stories. Marjorie Taylor Greene is involved in this as well. We're going to look at the housing market and some of the scandals related to that, along with Trump's recent interview with Laura Ingraham. And that's a part of this whole larger immigration debate. So a lot of content to discuss today, but of course, Epstein is at the top of the list. And Greg, you've actually done a lot of interesting work talking about Epstein's relationship with Bill Clinton specifically. So I'd like you to talk about that, but more generally about what we learned from this
Yeah,
new tranche of files.
yeah, definitely. Just to start off, the amount of files that have been released is astronomically high. It was more than 20,000 files. No one in their right minds could ever look through that many files, including me, Ofer. We spent hours looking through them. It's not going to work to look through all of them. But really, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Everything from pictures, redacted statements there, testimonies. It's really just wonderful. And what I found very interesting was that the Democrats chose to first release only 3 emails out of all of these files at the very beginning of this entire Epstein scandal, renewed Epstein scandal. Those 3 emails were released, I believe, Thursday, as soon as the government reopened, and it basically tried to smear Trump. I disproved all of those 3 emails in an article I published in Town Hall Media. Basically, at the end of the day, those were taken out of context. Each of those emails were years apart from one another, and all of it was just straight BS that Democrats tried posing on Trump. But something I found very interesting was that these 20,000 files that have been released by the House Oversight Committee after the Democrats chose to release these 3 emails, those were actually very interesting in that they really explained the detailed connections that Bill Clinton had with Jeffrey Epstein, including Jeffrey Epstein's former longtime pilot saying that Bill Clinton was on the plane while young girls were present, including Bill Clinton himself even being, invited to a deposition that he refused to attend only after being subpoenaed that he actually attend anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. But it was really insane, and like just the amount of connections that Bill Clinton has with Jeffrey Epstein. And it wasn't only him, it was a lot of other powerful Democrats at the time when this investigation was taking place, when Obama was in power. Obama's White House chief counsel was also implicated in a lot of connections with Jeffrey Epstein. So it was an obvious effort to try to smear Donald Trump in the 2016 election, but also it was an obvious effort to try to hide a lot of different factors of Democrats being connected with Jeffrey Epstein in these files. So, all of this got released, but Ofer, from what you were able to read out of these 20,000 files, what were your initial reactions? Number one, and number two, how serious of a connection do these have with anything relevant today or any relevant political figures that we see today?
It still is extremely relevant because we're still talking about hundreds of major figures that are still alive, and all of them have had some level of interaction with Epstein. And you could understand it before 2008, which is when he was convicted of that one count of solicitation of sex with a minor. But after that point, we still have hundreds of thousands of interactions, emails, files, footage of Epstein talking to other people. So that it means that either these people were totally ignorant to his past, or they were willing to look past it and didn't care, and were still willing to engage in business and just in conversation with him, with I believe to be extremely unethical. But it could be even worse because you're looking at Epstein and his entire history, and you could see how interconnected he was, not just on a business level, which is what you would expect him to be connected with, which would mean connections with certain banks like Chase Bank and JP Morgan, and with the figures associated with those groups, and a lot of CEOs like Reid Hoffman and people from that entire milieu, but also with the world leaders from not just the countries in the West, but also from the Middle East and Asia. And so that lends credence to a lot of the theories of him being an intelligence asset. So you're looking at emails of him conversing about relationships with Mongolia, the Ivory Coast, with India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and then Russia, which is another very interesting component in all of this. Epstein, just to go into this one particular example, he said that he has a very close connection with the Russian diplomats and that he could try to set up a negotiation back channel between Trump and the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. So clearly, he had connections in both countries that would allow him to do this sort of thing. And he also talked about in 2017 trying to negotiate a ceasefire between the Houthis in Saudi Arabia because at the time the two countries or the two parties were at war. So that really goes to show the level of connection between Epstein and the fact that he, as a person who didn't really have any sort of accredited financial background, he was able to very, really ambiguously and in very secretive manner rise up the ranks and become an individual who was managing the portfolios of extreme billionaires, people with extreme wealth like Leon Black and people from the mega group, these powerful billionaires that all have a sort of relationship with one another. So somehow all of them were connected to Epstein, and Epstein was actually given power of attorney over the estates of one of them, despite the fact that he did not have any sort of accredited financial background. And so again, it's a very weird backstory. And then it's even weirder the fact that he was able to maintain these relationships for years over years with all these world leaders. It doesn't matter which country they're from or which party they're from. I do think that which country they're from is important in the general sense of which country he was working for, but we should note that it isn't exclusive to any one individual nation. There are many that were involved in this and mired in various different ways, and all of it is horrible, absolutely disgusting. And so it is a very pertinent question now to ask whether Jeffrey Epstein did have blackmail on leaders, business leaders, global leaders, because that's at the crux of what the Democrats are trying to imply with Trump, with the emails they were releasing and that you contextualized earlier. But even if it doesn't apply to Trump within those specific emails, it does mean that Epstein was aware of the fact that he could use it as a threat. Even if he didn't actually have blackmail, he could use the allure or the threat of blackmail in order to get people to act in certain ways. And so you have to ask yourself, did Jeffrey Epstein actually place cameras and microphones in his offices, in his houses? Because that's something that was alleged by a lot of the victims, that he placed cameras and microphones in order to ensure that he had like evidence on all the people that were coming in and out of the island and of his New York City estates. And if he did, then where are those? And that's a part of the effort to release all the files, because we want to know, what did Jeffrey Epstein have available to him? Did he discard it? Does he still have it? Is the state holding on to it? And does it need to be subpoenaed? Because that can tell us whether he was actually an intelligence asset for any country. And if he was, what was he actually collecting as compromise on these people? Was it sex crimes? Because that's extremely relevant to, our safety as citizens. And these are our leaders, and they may be involved in blackmail schemes. So all in all, this is just what I think should be the first step. It shouldn't be the end. It should be the beginning of an even deeper investigation, which I hope the House will be able to pressure Trump on.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And again, the main reason Trump, in my opinion at least, the main reason why Trump is so against releasing these Epstein files is because at the end of the day, it will hurt a lot of innocent people. We don't know how many people Jeffrey Epstein was connected with, but what we do know is that Jeffrey Epstein was a very powerful man. He had a lot of different connections, a lot of different circles that he was a part of. And just because he was connected, just because he had friendships or business relationships with someone doesn't necessarily make that other person a co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein. And that's what we have to understand. Everyone gets their own due process. Everyone should be able to, make their case for why they are innocent, and we can't just assume that because Jeffrey Epstein is connected with someone that automatically makes them a co-conspirator. And Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, he knows that he has a lot of connections with Jeffrey Epstein, at least in whatever these files are going to say. Donald Trump was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, no matter how much he has to deny it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he had anything to do with any of this. So just because his name is going to be mentioned in the files, just because they're going to be very questionable stuff released in the files with his name, it doesn't really mean anything unless something is proven out of it. And a big risk is that the media constantly tries to paint Donald Trump in the worst way possible. That's why when these files were released just on Thursday, the media purposefully redacted names of certain victims like Virginia. Guffey, where she has explicitly said that Donald Trump had absolutely nothing to do in any sort of way with what Jeffrey Epstein did to her. And obviously, Guffey was a employee of Donald Trump, so it's not surprising that spent hours with her boss. I mean, that's not very surprising. But that's just one of the many examples of how the media tries to frame a certain narrative around any of the files. So, really, the release of any files with the name Donald Trump on it poses a massive risk to Donald Trump himself. And that's why he is so against releasing these files. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything in these files have anything to do with Donald Trump. All it means is that he wants to protect himself and the people around him from being falsely accused for things that have absolutely nothing to do with them. And I just wanted to stress that point. But Ofer, we were discussing this, earlier today, and that is the fact that Steve Bannon is actually mentioned in many interesting ways throughout the files, in ways that we never saw really before. When Steve Bannon was communicating with Donald Trump, it is important to note that he was one of Donald Trump's top advisors. But in general, I mean, I know you read these files. So what do you think this connection with Steve Bannon actually means? Does it mean anything? Is it something new? Is it important to just the general public?
So we already knew that they had a conversational relationship around 2019, right before he killed himself, actually, allegedly, obviously. But uh, in essence, he recorded a 15-hour documentary about Jeffrey Epstein, and it's been unreleased up until today. We don't know what's in the contents of
Yeah,
that movie. For some reason, it's not been released. I really want to know what was talked about over there. I think that it was supposed to be a rehabilitation tour of Epstein to try to make him look more favorable. And then he obviously died, and then you can't really release it because his reputation was so mired by controversy after his indictment. And so Bannon would not want to release it. It would make himself look bad. But the relationship, it also goes back a couple of years earlier. And I think that the goal behind it is that Bannon was a Trump advisor at the time. And he wanted to keep Epstein on Trump's good side. And by having an advisor of Trump in cahoots with Epstein and just talking and giving him information, feeding him all this access, it would prevent Epstein from growing resentful of Trump to such a degree where he would either, if you believe it, say something that is the truth about Trump that looks bad, or just make stuff up. And because it's Epstein, people would believe it because he's the guy who's behind the entire
yeah,
ring of these operations. So that's probably why Bannon did all this. But you look at the emails that are being circulated most in relation to Trump, there's so many of them because he was mentioned 1,500 times within the entire tranche of files. And that's not too surprising because these emails are from a time where Donald Trump was, again, the most famous person in the United States and also the leading political figure, whether it was before or after his presidency. And obviously, there was a very long relationship between Epstein and Trump that ended around 2003 and 2004. And so it's not too shocking that Epstein and other people that are close to him would mention Trump all of these times. So you have to look at the context in which they were mentioning him. And when you look at them, the most conspicuous, the ones that are the most out there, these messages, these emails are talking about how Trump spent hours with girls, but he did the emails themselves don't actually say that he did anything that is unethical, that is illegal with these individuals. And so it would actually be consistent with what we already know about the story between Trump and Epstein, which is that they were very close friends and that Epstein was a member of Mar-a-Lago. And so they would both go to Epstein's properties and also to Trump's properties. And they would stay around models because Trump was facilitating and was an owner of a lot of fashion chains, fashion models. And so he hosted like a lot of these beauty pageants as well with Epstein, actually. And so that's already been known. And he also owned a spa. And this is where the problems between Trump and Epstein actually started. So Epstein actually poached some of the women that were working for Trump at the spa and took them away and got them to work with him. Again, under the auspices of being a spa, not sex work, because nobody at the time knew about it, at least publicly
yeah.
admitted to such a thing. And so Trump got mad at Epstein for taking his workers. That was one of the there was another conflict because there was a bidding war between the two of them for a house in Florida, and Trump won. So that was another like point of contention. And then the one that's been mentioned a lot recently is that one of the Mar-a-Lago members, his teenage daughter, was actually invited to Jeffrey Epstein's home, and Epstein tried to assault her in his house. And once Trump found out about it, he was obviously very mad because it's his own member, and you don't want people to have a like horrible reputation of the Mar-a-Lago scene. And so he kicked out Epstein. It's a combination of all those factors, and that's why they no longer had a relationship past that point. And all of the emails that we've seen so far of Epstein talking about Trump, none of them have actually been able to verify that they had a relationship past this point, even though people were trying to imply that. For instance, people were saying that, oh, they went to Thanksgiving dinner together. I think it was in 2017, but it didn't line up with any of the scheduling for when Trump was in the UK at the time. So no, there's no proof that they were friends afterwards, that they were working afterwards. And if there was, then that would be a huge deal because it would be new information. But up until now, the story of what we already knew is sort of confirmed with the new emails, but there's still obviously so many more questions way beyond Trump, but also including him about Epstein's entire connections and his level of access to information.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And just to add on to your point, a big thing of what we have seen time and time again, especially with these emails and with the release of these emails, is that Democrats try to frame a narrative that is just not there. And these emails are a perfect example of it. So Democrats have tried, connecting the fact that Trump's advisors have exchanged emails with Jeffrey Epstein's team or Jeffrey Epstein himself is somehow, connected to the fact that Jeffrey Epstein and Trump were close in whatever sort of way after Jeffrey Epstein got kicked out, or according to him, left the Mar-a-Lago club as as a member. But it's definitely something very important. But a lot of Democrats have also been pointing to the idea that this email that was released on Thursday about the dog that didn't bark, according to Jeffrey Epstein, is alluding to the fact that Donald Trump knew about what Jeffrey Epstein was doing, but never actually told any sort of law enforcement. That's what Democrats tried to frame that email as. And I mean, if you read the actual email, that's not what it's saying. It's actually saying quite the opposite. It's saying that Donald Trump was someone who law enforcement never actually brought up as a person of interest or a person who Jeffrey Epstein was connected to, likely because Donald Trump was one of the first people who actually agreed to speak with law enforcement when asked to in relation to his connection with Jeffrey Epstein. So that was at the very, very beginning of the case. Donald Trump is actually cited, according to the attorney in charge of this the Jeffrey Epstein case, as one of the first people who actually self, came to law enforcement and chose to discuss. So that is a very interesting point that a lot of people should focus on. But I mean, we saw that Donald Trump ordered the DOJ to now investigate the connections between Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein and other Democrats and Jeffrey Epstein. Why? Why is he doing this? I mean, if he's like talking about how the files shouldn't be released, about how it's going to help innocent victims or hurt innocent victims if the files are released, then why is he talking about trying to investigate Democrats? Because that looks really bad. I mean, under any circumstance, if you're basically saying that, oh, now the media is accusing me of doing something, and now I'm going to just accuse them back of doing the same thing. So, like, what's your reaction to that?
He's trying to turn this entire situation into a partisan issue when it's not. And he's contradicting himself. Just a couple of days ago, he was saying this is an entire hoax, the Epstein hoax. That's what he was calling it. I think he still is. But it's simultaneously a hoax, but also the Democrats are the ones that are the ones involved in it. That's not possible. That's a contradiction. It's logically not possible. So Trump tried the strategy of calling it a hoax, like he called the Russia collusion narrative a hoax. And people were willing to believe that because there was no merits to those cases. And we explained that numerous times. But here with the Epstein case, it simply doesn't hold water. And so Trump realized that and he's shifting his political strategy and he's trying to shift the blame onto the Democrats. And sorry, it's not going to work entirely because obviously Trump is always going to be one of the main figures that we think about because he was mentioned the most in these files. Whether or not he's guilty or not, it doesn't matter in this case because people are still going to want to know the whole story of what happened between him and Epstein. And Trump is obviously not going to order an investigation into himself by the DOJ. That would be hilarious. So I do hope that the investigation doesn't just go after Trump's enemies Bill Clinton and Reid Hoffman and all these banks that Epstein had a connection with up until 2013 after he had already been convicted the first time in 2008. Those are very important components, by the way. We should be looking into that. But it should go far beyond that. We should be looking at the connections to intelligence. That should be the number one goal right now, to look at whether he was acting under the auspices of the CIA or the Mossad or Saudi intelligence or even Russian elements, because we know that around 2017 as well, Epstein was trying to establish a communication route between Russia and Israel and Syria, because at the time the Syrian civil war was raging on,
Yeah.
and Epstein has connections in both countries. So he was actually trying to establish a communication route, a backhand channel, so they can talk to one another and diffuse their tensions over Syria, because Russia was obviously supporting Assad at the time, and Israel was an opponent of them. So that does imply that there was a very strong degree of familiarity between Epstein and these countries. And same thing, by the way, going back to the Iran Contra scandal during the Reagan administration. At the time, Epstein was involved in the entire scandal, because if you guys remember, what happened over there is that the United States wanted to fund the Nicaraguan Contras, these capitalist fighters in Nicaragua, and they did it through weapon sales to Iran, and Israel helped the United States do this. So they were able to sell the weapons to Iran. Iran gave the money to Israel and the US, and then they gave the money to the Nicaraguans. So Epstein was involved in facilitating all of that. So you're looking at a guy who isn't just a finance guy, he's also involved in diplomacy and politics. And so, yeah, that begins to raise the question of intelligence connections. And it's not something that Trump ordered to be investigated. And so that's a very startling omission. And you should be investigating that. You should be investigating every single person there, because if you're innocent, that's what you should want. You should want a clean and honest investigation, looking at all the files so everybody can see for themselves what's actually going on. And then people that are not blamed, people that have done nothing wrong, that were just associated with him tangentially, they'll be exonerated through that process. And then we'll have the full truth about the elites that were involved, the countries that were involved, the businesses that were involved. That's what I want. And I'm not going to hold my breath for it. I don't think that will happen. I think he's just saying this now for headlines, and then he'll hope that the situation will die down. But it's our job to make sure that it doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. And again, this is in no way trying to criticize Donald Trump or anything, or allude to the fact that he has any sort of connections with Jeffrey Epstein. I don't believe that. All, again, that I believe is that Donald Trump is trying to protect him and the people around him from being falsely accused of something that they very obviously didn't do, because of the media and the media just habit of constantly lying about Donald Trump and his connections. But, Jeffrey Epstein, I mean, this is a very interesting case. We're going to be following it as long as it goes. There's going to be a lot more file releases, because there's just so many more files to be released. I don't actually necessarily believe that all of the files are going to be released, but we will see. Hopefully, most of them will. But for now, to move on to an equally as interesting topic. Yesterday night, I don't know if you were paying attention, but we saw that Donald Trump was going on quite the tangent about Marjorie Taylor Greene and her connections with Jeffrey Epstein as a whole, and fighting against Jeffrey Epstein and the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. So basically, they had a falling out now. Marjorie Taylor Greene is no longer endorsed by Donald Trump. It's very interesting, to say the least. Marjorie Taylor Greene was a very loyal Trump supporter from the very beginning, but now we are seeing there be some sort of distance. So, Oprah, what are your thoughts on this? Why is Marjorie Taylor Greene being ousted by Trump, and is this in any way connected with Jeffrey Epstein?
Yeah, it is. It's one of several reasons why they've had this falling out. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's been a MAGA diehard loyalist since day one, and she ran for Congress. I think it was in 2020. I remember she was the MAGA woman. Like everybody always, she was so stereotypically supportive of Trump in the way that she presented herself. And so just seeing how 5 years later this is all turned on its head, it is shocking. And both people are to blame for this, in my opinion, because you look at what happened in, I think it was 2022 or 2023 when Kevin McCarthy got ousted.
Yeah.
All of the Republicans, including Trump in this case, they were opposed to Kevin McCarthy, and they were trying to do everything to get him deposed. And then it was only Marjorie Taylor Greene on the side who was siding with McCarthy, which was really out of character for her, because she's supposed to be one of these further right-wing Republicans who was against the establishment leadership, which included Kevin McCarthy at the time. But she was actually opposed to Mike Johnson when he was coming up at the time. So that was the first rift between them. And at the same time period, there was also a bit of a clash between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert. They're both known as like these fierce MAGA female like representatives. So you think that they would be, allies, but apparently, the feminine energy from both of them like cancel each other out and like they hated each other. So yeah, that was how it started. But moving forward, right now the divisions between them are as follows: Epstein files. Marjorie Taylor Greene supported the initiative by the Democrats, the petition that just got enough votes to have a bill presented to the floor of Congress to release all of the files. And Trump pressured to not agree to that. He also pressured a couple of other women like Boebert and Mace to change their positions on this, but they did not relent. And so that's one area where there was
You know,
division.
Oprah, I don't mean to interrupt you, but you bring up a very interesting point. I mean, what do you think about the Kash Patel, Donald Trump, Mace, and Boebert, press conference meeting that we had earlier this week, where basically they were locked in a room, and Donald Trump was pressuring them to change their voice. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it just shows how sharp of a turn he made in that he doesn't actually believe what he was saying, which is, par for the course of politicians. He's just doing anything he can to try to get the attention away from himself and from people that he wants to protect, in my opinion. But in any case, you look at the divisions. One is Epstein files. Another one is due to immigration. Trump, he came out in this interview with Laura Ingraham and it appears defended the H-1B visa program, defended sending 600,000 Chinese students into the United States, into American universities in order to keep them from collapsing. That was his rationale behind it. And Marjorie Taylor Greene called him out for it very clearly. So that's another area of difference. And then also Israel, obviously. Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's opposed to foreign aid to Israel. And so she's been, calling Trump out and the administration out for all of their support for the country. And honestly, it's not just that. She's also been on The View, and on The View, she was very flattering to the left. And Trump doesn't like that at all when a Republican is really kind and cahoots with Democrats. So he was Marjorie Taylor Greene in this case. She was finding common ground with the women on The View, and she was also calling on Mike Johnson to swear in this Democrat representative who was being held up during the shutdown. So she was actually taking some stances that were associated with the Democrats, including saying that the mass deportations, were cruel. So she's all over the place. She doesn't really know what she wants. She's just trying to be contradictory to Trump, even if she's right on some of the issues. And so, yeah, Trump doesn't like that at all. He likes loyalty above anything. That's why he loves Lindsey Graham, even though we hate Lindsey Graham over here. He's a huge fan of him because he's completely loyal. Marjorie Taylor
Whoa,
Greene
whoa, whoa! I
is
wouldn't say we hate him. He's a very
maybe I
interesting
should speak for
guy.
myself. Yeah.
He's we actually were supposed to interview the competitor of Lindsey Graham, Andre Bauer, but unfortunately, due to the fact that Lindsey Graham gained Donald Trump's endorsement for I don't even know the hundredth time, that did not work out very well, and Andre Bauer chose to drop out of the race. But yeah, I mean, Lindsey Graham is an example of a fake Republican. I mean, like, there's no other way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. He has shifted like a chameleon and is doing anything he can to make Trump like him. And even though he's a horrible politician, that's what you need to do in order to survive. So Marjorie Taylor Greene, she has low impulse control, in my opinion. She is trying to be this like hero on social media. And as a result, she's actually correct about half of the issues. She's right about the H-1B visas. She's right about Epstein. Then it's so weird to then be going and agreeing with the view on Trump's cruelty on mass deportations. Like, how is that connected? So that's why Trump doesn't like her. And she wanted his endorsement actually for either Georgia Senator or governor. I don't remember which one it was. But
Governor.
now she's obviously not going to get that.
Yeah, Donald Trump really just has been showing that he has not been in a very close connection with Marjorie Taylor Greene for quite some time, and this was even before the Jeffrey Epstein files were released this week. I mean, he even previously has said multiple times that Marjorie Taylor Greene has lost herself and so on. So I mean, this divide is here. But Ofer, you bring up a very interesting point about the H-1B visas and how Donald Trump is really, I don't want to say shifting, but has a very nuanced take on immigration, something that a lot of Republicans are not in favor of, actually, especially with the H-1B visas. I mean, this week he was even on Laura Ingraham, as we discussed, and there he talked a lot about immigration, a lot about having student visas and all of that. So what are your thoughts in general of this shift of Donald Trump basically saying that H-1B visas are necessary for the United States and that we need them in order to maintain a stable country.
So what I hope is happening is a misunderstanding because Trump's messaging relating to these visas shifted after an ICE raid on a Hyundai plant in Georgia, where they arrested 400 South Korean workers, but they were on different visas to the H-1B visas. They were on completely different visas. And so Trump, he may have misunderstood what Ingram was asking about because he's actually not that familiar with all of these immigration schemes, which I think is a problem for the president, but that could be the likely explanation because he brought it up and he talked about productivity and about bringing, industry back to the US and that being a reason why I need immigrants. But the H-1B visa program isn't actually what you would need in order to do that. H-1B visas in theory, the way in which they were designed was to fill backlogs for high skilled companies when they needed upper end positions in specific sectors related to technology for the most part, but also in health and associated fields. But what it's turned into is a scheme for business owners to bring in people from third world countries, 71% of them from India, 15 from China, some from Philippines and other countries, bring them into this country, pay them 30% less than what you would pay a normal American worker, and then have them fill up all the entry level positions. And that way you can keep them dependent on you. And they basically serve as your indenture to the immigrants, obviously, because they're exploited. It hurts the Americans because they're not given the jobs. And it does not improve the quality because we're talking, for the most part, about entry level positions. We're not talking about people that are, extremely rare and high skilled. So Trump doesn't understand that. And the way to get this into his head would be to talk to JD Vance and Stephen Miller about this because they actually understand these topics. And it appears as if Trump just has a completely different understanding of the situation. So I would try to change his view on it through them. But yeah, we can't tolerate a situation where H-1B visas are continued, where the abuse that they are, experiencing is not cracked down upon. I think the whole program is dumb, but even within the program, there's abuse because one of the terms is that in order to get a visa, you have to prove that there's no American that would be willing to do that same job. So what these companies do is go to like a random local website and put
Yeah.
the post for job hiring at the bottom of the website, and nobody finds it, obviously, because they're doing everything they can to hide it. Then they show the government, oh, nobody's willing to apply for the job, and then they get the certification. So that's like an example of abuse, and that's how thousands of people have come into this country and taken jobs away from people that are recent graduates. 58% of recent college graduates don't have a job, and they could be in CS. Like, this is something that is extremely important to people that are in their early 20s. And that's a huge issue for their quality of life because they studied for 4 years to get a high level degree. They worked very hard, and now they don't have anything to show for it. They don't even have internships. So yeah, we have to change the H-1B program. We don't want to bring in 600,000 Chinese students because of the security issues, but also because it's already difficult enough to get into these universities, these elite universities, even if you are an excellent student. So the last thing we need is to flood the entire country with over 500,000 Chinese students who could be competing with them. So yeah, it's just completely off message, off base. And I hope that the backlash that he received from it, that is hurting his approval rating, and it's one of many reasons why it's going down. But I hope that is enough to make him, rethink all of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just to kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate here, I mean, H-1B visas in some part are important. They do get a lot of people into this country, and they used to be much more important than they are now when the United States actually had an issue with skilled workers, and when the United States, especially in like the 90s, the 80s, when the US had a shortage of workers and really was not developing as fast as other nations. So in that kind of reality, H-1B visas were wonderful, and they gave a lot of people, immigrants all across the world, an opportunity to get a high-paying job, relatively high-paying compared to the jobs that they were offered in their home countries, and come into the United States to basically have a new life. And that was wonderful. I'm a very big supporter of that. However, what it has turned into now is basically a program where normal Americans cannot get those same jobs. And companies are, as you explained, basically ripping off these not illegal, these immigrants that are coming into the United States to get these H-1B visas to eventually work in these jobs. And these are eventually going to be low paying jobs instead of high paying skilled labor jobs that that they are supposed to be. So not only do they take away from Americans, but they also provide a new layer of competition for Americans. So it's just not good. Um, I do think though that to an extent H-1B visas are needed. We do need, if we seriously do have a shortage of skilled workers, which at this point we don't, but if that does happen, then we will need H-1B visas. It's common sense, but that's just not the reality that America is in right now, and Donald Trump kind of should understand that, and I don't think he fully does yet. But I also don't think that H-1B visas are, the center stone of his policy yet. He's more focused right now, or through his last really 300 days in office, he was much more focused on making sure that foreign policy and is kind of cleaned up, that there's no more war in the world, and he was very successful at that, obviously, other than the situation in Russia and Ukraine. But now it seems as if he's shifting towards a more domestic policy lens, and that's going to be beneficial towards the American public. So we'll just have to wait and see in that regard. But Ofer, there's another part of all of this, and that is the housing crisis that is going on. I mean, mortgages are extremely high, even though they slightly decreased right now. We still see home prices skyrocketing. We see that income levels are not really growing in comparison to the prices of homes. It's harder now to buy a home than it ever was in American history. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? And Donald Trump has been relatively silent, obviously, other than his 50-year mortgage plan, which was quickly redacted by the White House team. And I'm not even going to go into why that's a horrible idea. But Donald Trump has been relatively silent, but we have seen even JD Vance has been giving some interviews on this, saying that mass deportation would actually lead to an increase in home availability. How much of that is true, and is that the only action that Donald Trump can take to lower the prices of homes and, in general, real estate for Americans?
It's a great question because we've seen Republicans now unable to address the crisis that is facing young Americans, but even people that are middle aged when it comes to housing affordability, which was previously a cornerstone of the American dream. Owning your own home and then having the nuclear family raised over there. That's out of question for most people that are either in Gen Z and even some millennials. Only 26% of older Gen Z people are homeowners, and the number is 55% for millennials. So you're looking at a situation where there are 4.5 million housing units that are in a deficit right now that we need to be built that aren't available for people. So there's a shortage of housing. There's also a massive surge in the price of housing. The costs are going up. They went up 60% in 6 years. That's
Hmm.
an absolutely insane increase over such a short period of time, even though it went down during COVID. So you can imagine how much higher it was, how much more it rose during the latter portions of the Biden presidency. So all these factors combined together, they've led to a situation that is extremely unaffordable for Americans, whether it's home ownership, but even rent. Even rent is a huge difficulty now. I think it's gone up by around 30% or 20% since 2019. So that's also a pretty substantial amount. And that's for people that are renters. And we're not talking about high quality rental apartments either. So young Americans, millennials, any sort of person who doesn't have generational wealth, they're suffering from this problem. And yes, when you look at it, immigration is one of the causes, but it's one of at least four or five that I
Yeah.
could think of off the top of my head. Immigration is a problem because every single year you have around 500,000 new families that move into the United States. So where they're going to go? They're going to go to certain apartments or they're going to go to houses. And that's not illegal immigration. That's legal immigration. That's coming from immigrants that were processed here and we know about their existence. That's not even including the illegal immigrants that came in the millions during the Biden era and also took up housing. So that leads to the shortage, which in turn leads to bidding wars. And then that leads to higher prices for basically everybody on end. And so, yes, immigration is a big problem that is related to all of this. And the immigrants, they also, for the most part, 70% of them concentrate within the top 20 metropolitan areas. So the problems are also going to be the most pronounced in these major cities, where a lot of young people that, are college educated and want to go work in a profession, they need to be living close to, whatever work they have in these cities. And so they're sort of boxed in and trapped. So the only option they have is becoming a rent slave in a really horrible apartment. So that's one of the problems. But mass deportations won't solve all of it by no means, especially at the pace that it's at right now. Mass deportations are not occurring fast enough to actually deal with the problem because we still have legal immigration that's basically compensating for the fact that we're deporting people. So I do hope that it gets sped up, but that's only one component. Another problem is private equity. Private equity is buying up these houses. So that's mainly
Yeah.
for rentals, not necessarily just for homeownership. But the problem is you have these companies like Vanguard and BlackRock that are outbidding first time bidders. And that's obviously going to be the case because they have all this capital to play with. So they buy up the cheapest houses and then they make sure they're not going to be put on the housing market for purchase. They're just going to rent them out for 10 to 20% higher than what they would have been rented out otherwise. So people are paying more, and they also know they're never going to become homeowners when they're buying, when they're renting from these particular private equity firms. So that's taking off a lot of houses, including single family homes. Now, that's a huge issue that I hope that there's reform when it comes to this, that private equity firms are buying up single family homes and turning them into rental properties rather than one that you can buy and get a mortgage for. So that's another issue. And then the biggest issue, in my opinion, are boomers. Boomers that are sitting on massive properties with 3 to 4 rooms, with bedrooms, 3 to 4 bedrooms, and there are only two of them in the house. So what's going on? Why are you holding on to it? I get that these people, they want to appreciate the value and the assets that they have. And the boomers right now have about $19 trillion worth of equity due to all of these properties they own. But it's coming at the expense of the American people, the people that would otherwise have been buying up these homes from them. So that's one of the main reasons why. So it's a combination of boomers not downscaling. It's a combination of private equity buying it up. It's also a consequence of the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates very high up until recently when they were cut down. So it was very difficult to get pretty cheap mortgage. And then it's also because of immigration. So altogether, we have to address all of those issues.
Yeah, definitely. And in my, you laid it out very well, and I just don't think immigration though is even in like it's an issue, and it is contributing to the increase in home prices, but it's not anything compared to the fact that private equity is buying out these houses. I mean, in my opinion, at least, that is by far the biggest issue. Zillow, for example, is making millions upon billions of dollars from just buying out these single family homes that are relatively cheap and renting them, as you said. So that is a really really big issue. It's a very difficult issue also to solve. So I want to see the Trump administration tackle that. But that is one of the many reasons why home prices are so high right now. And I'm very reluctant on criticizing legal immigration just because the United States has a very, very bad replacement rate right now. We are approximately at a 1.7 replacement rate when the ideal replacement rate is obviously 2.1. So right now we are struggling greatly in that sense. So we need some sort of legal immigration, but the question is how much. And that is really just where our country is at. Decreasing in population though would be by far the worst option for anyone. So we need to have reform in the culture that we are feeding kids. That is a very big contributor to why the replacement rate is so bad right now. We need to have reform in the housing market, and that is really going to contribute to an increase in families. That's why I'm in a big support for Donald Trump's efforts on tackling, crisis in the foster care industry right now. He just signed an executive order this week. He has the big beautiful bill increased the child tax credit. All of that is beneficial to the American people and really one of the main issues that we should be focusing on. And no other leader really has. So. In general, he should really be gearing a lot more attention towards those reforms because, again, education, encouraging childbirth, encouraging families to stick together, that is by far the most important aspect for American life and how to end up having a prosperous country, not now, but in 25 years. So it's good that he's reforming that. I'm really, really happy about that. But yeah, I mean, we discussed a lot this this episode. It was packed full, but really all in all, it's been a crazy week with all of these files especially being released with the government reopening. I mean, the Democrats' reaction to the government reopening, and just as a final topic, I want to kind of touch on that. I mean, I'm sure you have seen the videos of Bernie Sanders, of Chuck Schumer, basically yelling on the Senate floor about how they're so mad that the government is reopening. But now, as we're on the other side of things, we have seen that air traffic controllers are back. We are, in general, being, the American people are happier than they were before this. So, Ofer, what I wanted to ask you as a final question for this episode, do you think that if the government reopened prior to the election, so I don't know, 3 weeks ago, would the outcome of the election been different in any way that would have actually changed the results?
No, I don't think so. Because, yes, it was one of the talking points the Democrats used because they juxtaposed their position on healthcare to the Republican one. But the main reason why voters decided to go for the Democrats is because of the cost of living, and that would not have changed whether or not the government shutdown was in place, because those are far deeper issues that have to be addressed over the course of years.
Yeah.
But yes, the shutdown made it worse because you didn't have SNAP benefits and various other forms of welfare that helped alleviate those pains. So yeah, I don't think it would have done much to help the Republicans out in any case.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the only real difference we would have seen is that in Virginia, we would have seen less of a gap there just because of the amount of
Yeah.
federal workers that live right next to DC and that commute from Virginia to DC. That would have been a slight difference, but again, the results wouldn't have been different, especially in New York City. But yeah, I mean, this episode was great. Thank you guys for watching on the Patriot Perspective. We'll be back shortly, and yeah, have a great weekend.